Hello Internet. This video is the third part in a series about privilege, so if you haven't seen the first two parts, check them out here to the right. Assuming you've seen those, let's jump back in. Some of you may be wondering why we even talk about privilege, if it's just a conversation about the inherent advantages or disadvantages of life. I mean, what's the point? The point is that those advantages and disadvantages aren't inherent, and the advantages don't need to stay confined to the people that are born with them. Jeremy could have easily shared his privilege just by being Jacob's friend. Here's what I mean. Let's say Jacob and Jeremy became friends in kindergarten. Instead of Jacob going through school with no support outside of his overworked teachers, he would suddenly have a friend for whom excelling was expected, supported, and encouraged. And he'd see a perspective that was very different than the one he saw at home. If Jeremy had invited him to his tutoring appointments or had studied with him and gotten to know him, so would Jeremy's parents. Suddenly Jacob not only does better in school, but he also graduates with a letter of recommendation from a banking executive. If Jacob couldn't study with Jeremy because he was too busy watching his younger siblings because his mom was working a 12-hour shift, then suddenly there's a society wife who knows that there's a single mother who's barely making ends meet, and a bright young man whose education is suffering because of it. So, she gets Jacob's mom a job with better pay, steady hours, and insurance. Now Jacob's mom can look after her children, and Jacob can focus on his education. Spending time with Jeremy in and outside of school, Jacob picks up tips that allow him to interact naturally with people from a variety of backgrounds, and he starts to make valuable connections. He graduates high school, gets a full-ride scholarship, and becomes a renowned neurosurgeon. What was the difference? The only real difference is Jeremy shared his privilege with Jacob. And that didn't lessen Jeremy's privilege at all. Jeremy still had every advantage he had, but suddenly Jacob had advantages that he never would have had, that enabled him to succeed in a way that he may not have ever been able to do otherwise. The point of discussing privilege is not to find excuses for our failures, but rather to recognize ways that we can help other people. I said at the start of the first video that enjoying privilege doesn't make you a bad person, and I stand by that. I'm a middle-class white American cis-sexual male. I've got a lot of privileges. That doesn't make me a bad person. But there is something that's important to remember when you talk about privilege. Enjoying privilege and selfishly keeping it to yourself is a very bad thing. If I don't make an effort to extend the same privileges and advantages that I enjoy to the people around me, especially those who are disadvantaged, I am being a bad person. To go back to the first metaphor, it'd be like seeing a blind person struggling to cross the street I'm already crossing and just walking by them. Sometimes we are the blind person, but I'm willing to bet that most of the times we're the one walking by. So let's stop hiding our heads in the sand and pretending we don't have privileges, and let's look for ways to share our privilege with the people around us. We won't lose anything, but we could change everything for someone else. Obviously, privilege is generally not as clear-cut as I've laid it out in these examples. Sometimes the Jeremys of the world have an alcoholic mother. Sometimes the Daniels of the world are torn by divorced parents. I haven't even touched on the types of privilege that come into play when you start including gender or race or religion or sexual orientation into the picture. However, complications aside, hopefully it's easier to recognize what privilege is and isn't now. Because we all enjoy privilege, and it's only when we recognize our privilege that we can begin to share it. Thank you for joining me. Please leave your thoughts about privilege in the comments below and subscribe to stay part of the conversation. I'll see you next time.